Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences Grand Round Series, 2020-2021. One comment about the Grand Round Series. This is a newer series for this academic year, and we're trying to have presentations, aiming to have presenters most weeks out of the year. The series of presenters are informed by 4 different panels, advisory panels, focusing on presentations related to education, updates in clinical matters, staff training, faculty development, and in research, along with guidance and advice from resident trainees. There are 2 primary funding sources for the series, and I was just talking with Dr. Piel beforehand about the numerous staff members, including Mike, who's on now, Samhar, Becky Sladek, and Rosemary, who are helping with many of the aspects and important details of having the series going. I want to remind everyone about the evaluation that's available to fill out, and please share any comments about the series that you have if you'd like to with me. And I'll stop now and pass things over to Dr. Runitzer.
Okay, hello everybody. So Jürgen Runitzer here. I'm the chair of the department, and I also want to welcome you to our virtual Grand Round series. And it's my real pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker is one of our own, one of our faculty, Dr. Jennifer Piel. Jennifer is an associate professor in our department. She's a really unique faculty member in that she is a person who is trained both in the law and also in medicine and psychiatry. She's a national expert in forensic psychiatry, and what she's going to talk about today is an effort that she has led really over the last couple of years to put together a group of our faculty and staff in developing and building a new center in our department called the Center for Mental Health Policy and the Law. So there is a lot of really important work that happens at the interface of healthcare and the law, and in our case, more specifically, mental health and the law. So, you know, you all can think of examples. So, you know, a young person who is considered a juvenile offender by the law and is considered a young person who's living with serious mental health or addiction problem by us. We could have lots of debates about, is it better to lock someone like that up or to treat them? Or maybe what we really need to do is something that, you know, is working really well at this interface. A person who is mentally ill and homeless, you know, who is struggling with a serious mental illness or addiction problem. Is it better to send the police out to see somebody like that, or to send a social worker out to see someone like that? Lots of sort of heat in this area and not much light as far as I'm concerned. So my hope for the new center is not to create more heat, but to create some light, you know, and specifically to really help think in a sort of in a serious, thoughtful, systematic way. What are ways in which we can, you know, help people better, more effectively at this interface of mental health and the law? How do we train clinicians and first responders and people in the legal system to work more effectively? You know, to have maybe some more empathy for the patients, for each other's perspectives and challenges, and then to really work together really effectively. How do we train mental health professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, others to really work well at this interface, and to both do research in this area, but also to, when it's right, to do some really good advocacy in this area. So that's my hope for this group. I know that we have a group of talented faculty. Jennifer has been a great leader for this effort, and I'm going to get out of her way and let her talk a little bit about this new program. Thank you.
All right, can you hear me okay? I want to thank you for that warm introduction. I'm delighted to be talking today about the newly recognized Center for Mental Health Policy and the Law, which is housed out of our own Department of Psychiatry. It will be focused on programming at the intersection of mental health and the law. In other words, forensic psychiatry. Now, I'll be presenting on the center today, but you should know that a lot of people have worked tirelessly to make the plans for the center and get us to the point where we're at today. And I want to recognize the core faculty, the affiliate faculty, and the many consultants that have helped us get to this point. I also want to recognize the contributions of Dr. Bruce Gage to forensic psychiatry in our state. Now, this hasn't been highly publicized, but this happens to be a lecture in recognition of his work. This is the first of an annual series, the Bruce Gage Endowed Lecture in Forensic Mental Health. And for those who don't know Dr. Gage, I've listed here some of his professional roles. He has served as a clinical associate professor in our own department, the chief of psychiatry for the Department of Corrections. And although we don't currently have a forensic psychiatry fellowship program in our state, we formerly had one, and he led that program. Besides his professional roles, Dr. Gage has been a strong advocate for persons with mental illness who have ties to the justice system, and he's been a wonderful educator. On a personal note, he's been a wonderful mentor and friend, and I'm so pleased that the department is able to recognize him and his work in this way. So what we're going to do with our time together today is really three things. I hope to discuss the breadth of forensic mental health. Essentially, what is forensic mental health? Then we'll talk about ways in which forensic mental health is relevant to you, regardless of your practice setting. So even if you don't work in a traditional forensic setting, we'll talk about ways that forensic mental health may impact you and your work. And then we'll talk about the Center for Mental Health Policy and the Law. I'll share with you the impetus and some of our future directions. Now, you should know that the center is in its infancy, and some of the examples that I'll be giving today are just that, examples of the type of work we hope to do in the future. Some of this is aspirational, but we hope to grow the center and develop its programming over time. So first of all, what is forensic mental health? Well, some of you may come to know of forensic mental health through what you see on television and through film. And in fact, that's very common for laypersons, including members of juries. So you may see here Dr. Hannibal Lecter. Of course, he is a cannibalistic serial killer, but he's also a forensic psychiatrist that helps the FBI identify and locate other serial killers. He's what we call the Dr. Evil portrayal of the forensic expert. The other image here is that of Dr. George Wong. He is from Law and Order SVU, and he has a much more positive portrayal of the forensic expert. That what we call the scholarly professor portrayal. Others of you might be familiar with forensic mental health through media portrayals of high-profile cases, such as those here. You might recall the case of Andrea Yates. She's a woman who drowned her 5 children in the bathtub. She pled not guilty by reason of insanity, and many mental health experts weighed in on her mental state because she had a history of postpartum depression and psychosis. After a long, complicated legal battle, she ultimately was successful in her insanity defense, and she remains in a state psychiatric hospital to this date. The other image here is that of Mr. James Holmes, and you may recognize his name because he killed 12 and injured 70 in the Aurora, Colorado mass shooting at a movie theater in 2012. Like Ms. Yates, he also attempted a mental health defense and pled not guilty by reason of insanity. He was not successful in his defense, and he's currently residing in a correctional facility. Now, I share these cases with you, one, because the media commonly portrays the forensic mental health expert as a hired gun or the battle of the experts. But also you should know that this role, that of as a consultant or providing expert testimony in court, is just one of many roles that forensic mental health professionals provide. And I want to share some additional roles with you today. This is the definition of forensic psychiatry put forth by the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law. So it's a subspecialty in which scientific and clinical expertise is applied in legal contexts involving civil, criminal, corrections, regulatory, or legislative matters, and it's specialized clinical consultation in areas such as risk assessment or employment. Now, this is the definition for forensic psychiatry, but definitions for forensic psychology are similar. Now, you may take from that definition that there are three primary divisions of forensic mental health. One is criminal forensics, that is, issues and programming that deal with the criminal justice system. Another is civil forensics, issues and programming that deal with the civil legal system. And then the legal regulation of psychiatry. And these are all interrelated. I'm going to give you some examples of each of the divisions. Now, I'm spending some time on this today because the UW Center for Mental Health Policy and the Law aims to take a broad definition of forensic mental health, and we anticipate having issues and programming that address all of these divisions. So here are some examples of criminal forensics. And remember, these are just examples. They certainly aren't exhaustive. Some mental health professionals will play a role in assessing defendants for their competence to stand trial. In other words, are they fit from a mental health standpoint to proceed with their legal case as defined by law? Other mental health professionals will assess criminal defendants for their mental state at the time they committed the criminal act and whether they meet criteria for insanity, we call that criminal responsibility, or another mental health defense. Some mental health professionals will be involved in assessing persons for sentencing considerations, such as mitigation factors in sentencing. Those could include mental health defenses, history of mental health, trauma, and other early childhood development issues. Many mental health clinicians in forensics will be involved in the assessment of violence risk. And a very important role for forensic mental health clinicians is the treatment of persons with mental illness in corrections and other forensic settings, such as our forensic units in state psychiatric hospitals. Here are some examples on the civil side, civil forensics. So civil capacities. Now, you likely are all familiar with capacity for medical decision-making, but the law recognizes a whole host of civil capacities, and some of those capacities are defined in law. For example, assessment of testamentary capacity, or in some cases, capacity to enter into a certain contract. Some mental health professionals will be involved in the assessment of psychiatric malpractice or guardianship. Fitness for duty. This is when we assess someone's mental state to determine if they are fit to have a certain employment position at a given time. Disability determinations. It's really important that you have an understanding of your role in those type of assessments and the particular legal parameters around the disability being claimed. And psychological harm. This is assessed when someone claims that they sustained psychological or emotional harm from a claimed injury event, such as gender discrimination, sexual harassment, or a personal injury. The evaluator will determine first whether there was indeed psychological harm and whether then it was caused by the claimed injury event. And then finally, the legal regulation of psychiatry. There are a whole host of ethical and legal issues around confidentiality, the duty to protect, and what I mean by that is the mental health clinician's duty to protect third parties from the dangerous acts of our patients. Civil commitment, and this is particularly an important topic for us currently, given recent changes to our Involuntary Treatment Act law. The patient's right to refuse treatments and the circumstances by which they may be involuntarily treated. Issues around informed consent and professional licensure, not only scope, but also disciplinary issues by licensing boards. So you may already be thinking about ways that forensic mental health affects you. But I want to really drive this point home, and I want you to think about ways forensic mental health might affect you regardless of your practice setting. I'm going to do that by sharing some stories with you. The first story is that of Mr. Joshua Stuller. And you might recognize his name because he has been vocal and his story has been in the news. Mr. Stuller is a man with lived experience with mental illness and has also had ties to the criminal justice system. In fact, he was the subject of an article put forth by Disability Rights Washington that speaks about his time in solitary confinement. And in fact, that's how I first met Mr. Stuller. You'll hear in his story that he spent 13 months in solitary confinement as a pre-trial detainee. So Mr. Stuller created a video just for us about his experience. One thing to note is that he self-edited the video, and there are some places where it's a little bit bunched, but I think it won't be too distracting. You'll be able to follow along with his story. The second thing to note is that this is his personal narrative, and I feel really pleased that he felt comfortable sharing this with us today. There might be some things in his narrative that are debatable or that don't ring true to you, but this is his personal experience, and I think it can be very valuable for us all to hear it.
My name is Joshua Stuller. My diagnosis is schizoaffective disorder. I'm a former caregiver for adults with developmental disabilities. I was seeing many therapists diagnosed with at first schizophreniform disorder. I was hearing voices of threats and delusions of persecution. The voices identified themselves as employees of a real estate company. At that point, I was also drinking very heavily. On my 27th birthday, my family and I went out for breakfast. They could see that something was wrong. I was very intoxicated. So after the breakfast, I returned to my step-grandmother's house with the family, which was where I lived at the time. So I took a shower and got in the car and went to work. After I left, concerned, my parents entered my residence without my permission, searched the house. They found piles and piles of empty vodka bottles, as well as a firearm, legally owned firearm. Most alarming, they found what was later interpreted to be a hit list or a manifesto concern they called the local crisis line. Instead of the crisis line responder sending out a designated crisis responder, mental health professional, they called the police. Confiscated the note, all of the other items that my stepfather had found without search warrants. At my place of employment, I was in a client's home taking care of them, and I was handcuffed. I had no idea what the hell I had done, because up to that point I hadn't done anything. I was originally charged with stalking and harassment just based on the list of names, threats to kill based on what I had written. The prosecutor upped the charges to 7 counts of first-degree attempted murder. 13 months in jail. I was actively psychotic for virtually the entire duration of my stay. Eventually, I reached a plea bargain out of desperation to get out of jail. A not guilty by reason of insanity plea to 7 counts of felony harassment. I did not harass anybody. I was subsequently sent to Eastern State Hospital. Within 3 months of my arrival there, I was stabilized, but I spent another 14 months there just trying to get released. It's a very old-fashioned, shall we say, approach to mental health. They say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and I disagree. What doesn't kill you changes you. And I know that I'll never be the same. If 13 months in solitary confinement while floridly psychotic gives me any say to pitch in my 2 cents. My constitutional rights were violated. There were laws that were already in effect to help protect people like myself that were experiencing a mental health crisis. The psychiatric hospital, all that it really is to me is an alternative to prison. You would think that once a patient is stabilized, then immediately plans for release would commence. But as far as treatment, I can't think of anything that I would consider treatment. It mostly consisted of the patient sitting around a television watching The Price is Right, Wheel of Fortune. Since my release, I have testified before the legislature in Olympia in favor of Senate Bill 5444, which in part aims to divert people like myself from the criminal justice system and directly into treatment, which is where we need to be. I can forgive, but I can't forget. But thank you for listening to me ramble. Not much of a talker, but I hope that you at least got something out of this story.
All right, so even if you do not regularly work with people in the criminal justice system, I bet that you could relate in some way to Mr. Stuller and the issues that he raised in his video. His story or parts of it could be that of you, your patient, or one of your loved ones. Now, Mr. Stuller alluded to a number of forensic issues in his brief 3-minute clip. And this is an exercise that I commonly do with trainees to help them identify forensic issues in routine practice. So I'm going to do this with you as well. Mr. Stuller mentioned that he was in community care before he was ever involved with the criminal justice system. So some forensic issues that would be relevant in community care include his ongoing assessment of violence risk and the clinician's duty to protect. Continuing on that theme of mental illness and dangerousness, Mr. Stuller, he mentioned that his family had contacted crisis intervention services, but the police showed up to his house. And this is an ongoing source of debate right now as to which service should be called during a behavioral health crisis. Mr. Stuller's case raises the association between mental illness and violence, which is often overstated in the media and other sources. And it also reminds us that there are legal regulations that prohibit some persons with mental illness from owning firearms. Mr. Stuller mentioned his treatment. So he had some care while in corrections, and that can often be very complex. There are some unique legal challenges and legal differences to providing care in correctional facilities. He mentioned his time in restrictive housing, which is also called solitary confinement. And you should know there's a growing body of research on the psychological effects for solitary confinement for persons who are juveniles, those with mental illness, and others. He also mentioned treatment after he had been acquitted by reason of insanity. That can be challenged, and also the release procedures for people who have been acquitted by insanity. It's a whole host of different complications with the legal system. Now, he didn't mention it specifically, but by very nature that he was able to be successful with insanity, you might recognize that he underwent expert evaluations by mental health professionals. So he did for his criminal state. He also had a civil case that challenged whether he sustained psychological harm from his detention, and he had an evaluation for that as well. These types of evaluations typically involve assessment of malingering also. In Mr. Stuller's case, he has really become an advocate for persons with mental illness, and he has sought to change the law. And the legislation that he mentioned happens to speak to competence to stand trial issues. Now, Mr. Stuller shared his personal experience. I really thank him for that. I'm also going to give you the perspective of Dr. Phillip Resnick. Now, Dr. Resnick is a nationally known forensic psychiatrist who has consulted on a number of high-profile cases, including that of Andrea Yates and Ted Kaczynski. He is known for being a remarkable educator, and in fact, he was my training director for forensic psychiatry. He's going to share now his perspective on how forensic mental health is relevant to you, regardless of the setting that you work.
I have been teaching about forensic psychiatry for 45 years, and I wanted to highlight some points. First, all psychiatrists will be dealing with the legal regulation of psychiatry, such issues as confidentiality, malpractice, getting informed consent, violence and suicide risk, dealing with subpoenas, duty to warn. These are issues that all psychiatrists need to be knowledgeable about. Also, psychiatrists are going to be brought into court even if they don't have an interest in forensics. For example, in civil commitment or in cases in which you treat a patient for PTSD, you may be subpoenaed into court as a fact witness. And over the course of a 36-year career, psychiatrists can anticipate being sued themselves about 3 times. And then finally, society has a great need for psychiatrists to be knowledgeable about forensic issues. For example, the majority of inpatients are now in jails and prisons rather than in psychiatric hospitals. And finally, I would just make the point that it is a pleasure and a duty that we all learn to serve justice. Thank you.
So Dr. Resnick raised some topics that commonly evoke ethical and legal considerations. And at times, navigating these areas in clinical practice can be challenging, and having a source for consultation may be helpful. Over the past several months, I've been keeping track of the consultations that I receive that are specific to psycho-legal issues or issues in forensic mental health. And so by way of example, these are the types of consults that I received during the month of October of this year. During that month, I received 34 consults on forensic issues from really a varied group, some from VA staff, UW faculty, UW trainees, and mental health professionals in the community. I've listed here the topics of the consults that I received. They really vary. Some speak to what to do if you're asked to comment on a source in the media that speaks to a person that you have not personally evaluated. Issues of informed consent, issues about the Involuntary Treatment Act and the changes to our civil commitment law, responding to court orders like subpoenas, disability assessments. So we've seen a rise in the requests for disability assessments during this pandemic. And it's very important that you understand your role in those assessments and what that assessment is actually asking you to do. And then the duty to protect. Again, the mental health clinician's duty to protect third parties from the violent acts of their patients. I can tell you that this has been a topic that I receive numerous consult questions about, nearly high levels of questions every month, really for the past couple of years since the Volk case came out. Now, we hope as a center to be able to provide some consultation services for those of you in routine practice that have questions of a psycho-legal nature, as well as others. So let me talk now more about the Center for Mental Health Policy and the Law. The impetus from the center really came a few years ago. The Washington State Legislature directed the university and others to research and come up with a proposal for high-quality forensic teaching services at our state hospital, Western State Hospital. And this came about in part because we formerly had a co-sponsored forensic psychiatry fellowship through the state hospital, but we no longer have such a program. And historically, we have had a robust forensic psychology fellowship program there, but in the past, it trained just 1 psychologist per year. So there was hope that we could bolster existing training resources at the state hospital and perhaps beyond. I was very lucky to lead a team of really skilled forensic mental health clinicians and other educators in looking at the current best practices around the country and coming up with a plan for forensic teaching services, primarily localized initially through our state hospital. In doing this, there were a number of other things going on in the state that really informed us that forensic mental health services deserves more attention. Washington State, like so many states, has seen a rising volume of persons with mental illness involved in the criminal justice system. And Governor Inslee announced plans for forensic centers of excellence at 1 or more of our state hospitals. You should know that forensic facilities have many of the patients most in need of high-quality psychiatric services. Governor Inslee and the state have recognized the importance of workforce development in behavioral health. And regarding forensics, the supply of mental health clinicians with aptitude and specialized training in forensics has not sufficiently increased to meet the current demands or the projected demands. Around this time, there were also some legal cases that involved the intersection of mental health and the law. And these are just two examples. One is the True Blood series of cases. This speaks to wait times for competence to stand trial evaluations, and then the restoration services. And then the case of Volk v. Demelier. This is the case that speaks to the duty to protect for mental health clinicians. Each of these really evoked a response by groups of mental health professionals, also through our court system and the legislature, and highlights the role of behavioral health and the law and how they intersect. Now, as we were researching how we would best put forth plans for high quality forensic teaching services at our state hospital, we recognized that there could be a whole host of benefits to having such high quality teaching programs, not only for the state hospital, but for the university, the state, patients, and even evaluees who are undergoing a criminal evaluation defense for their defense or for their case. Now, I won't go through all of the details of this slide here, but you should know that we recognize such a whole host of benefits that could be applied in the forensic teaching service sense. We thought, well, maybe we could magnify these benefits by creating a centralized hub to coordinate our efforts and advance a wide range of activities related to forensic mental health. And that's really where the center idea was born. So with the idea for the center and our continued efforts to explore ways to have high quality teaching services, we set out to do a number of things. We did a systemic literature review. We surveyed forensic training directors all across the country. We held focus groups with clinicians who had worked in forensic settings and focus groups with persons with lived experience to find out more about their course and what they need from the system. We investigated ways to advance research. We looked at the existing barriers to forensic education and the workforce in this state. And then we had a really wonderful opportunity, and I think unique opportunity, to look at other centers across the nation. In fact, we got to do site visits at some of the most important programs providing forensic education. And we also did a whole host of interviews with directors of centers that focused on health law, mental health law, and then also centers that provided clinical services in forensic mental health. From these, we came up with some core values that currently make up our mission for the center. These include, we hope to advance empirically supported assessment and intervention practices for individuals really at all points across contacts with the criminal justice system. We aim to assist courts in making informed decisions through our evaluations and also consultation services. We'd like to enhance law and policy by educating policymakers on a whole host of issues that relate to behavioral health, including civil commitment, various competencies, and juvenile justice, by way of example. And of course, the training and education arm remains very important to us. We hope to educate the next generation of scholars and practitioners in forensic mental health, and also provide training to mental health professionals who are already working in forensic settings, and maybe those who have other associations with the legal system, like first responders or members of the legal community. We think the center's mission aligns very well with that of the broader university and that of the Department of Psychiatry. In part, the mission of the university says that as a public university, we are deeply committed to serving all of our citizens. And we take that to mean citizens who have involvement with the justice system as well. Our own department has as part of its mission to improve the health of the public through excellent clinical care, education, and research. And both the department and the university recognize the value of strategic partnerships that share the vision of improving the health of the public through better mental health care. So this slide shows the general layout of our center. Now, the center is headquartered within our own Department of Psychiatry, but we have already been branching out and making connections with other faculty and staff across schools at the university. And by its very nature, forensics really relies on the judicial system and other partners, state partners and community partners. We know that there is a lot of wonderful forensic work being done by community programs and a lot of state agencies. And we don't want to replicate what is being done. We want to complement what is being done. So with this, we aim to have 3 primary branches of the center. One branch will focus on education and training. One will focus on research and policy, and a third on service. So let's take a closer look at all 3 branches. The first branch is the education and training branch. Now, this is a very important branch. You may know that forensic psychiatry and forensic psychology are acknowledged and respected subspecialties within mental health. And in fact, forensic psychiatry is an ACGME core requirement for general psychiatry training. Research has shown us that there is high demand for specialized training in forensics, but currently we have limited subspecialty training in forensics in our state. As I mentioned, we don't currently have a forensic psychiatry fellowship, and until recently, we were only training a few psychologists at the postdoctoral level in forensic psychology per year. This is really important because currently healthcare practitioners with a strong interest in this area leave our state to get that advanced training. And given the challenges in learning new laws and the regulations around this practice, so too often those individuals don't make it back to practice in our state. So we think this arm in particular, the training and education arm, will be a direct link to workforce development. Here are some broad categories that we hope to tackle with the training and education arm. So we already have some training for psychiatry residents, and we want to continue the emphasis on training for clinicians in training by having strong, high-quality didactics and rotations. We want to continue to look at the best practices across the country and see what we can do to really implement them here. Give our trainees a solid foundation in forensics, but also expose them so that those who want to pursue this as their career know what they're getting into. We also hope to have subspecialty training in forensics, so development of a forensic psychiatry fellowship program. And we've learned that there are a multitude of benefits to having joint training with psychology and psychiatry. So we want to find ways that we might be able to partner and also work with the psychology trainees at Western State and elsewhere. Faculty development is another big arm of this area. We want to make sure we're supportive of a culture of teaching and scholarship and support those faculty members that might have aptitude and skills, but might be working at a remote site. And we want to provide community training, some training for people in the community doing work in forensics as a mental health professional or as a legal member of the community, and maybe others. Here are some examples of activities that faculty and affiliate faculty with our center have done to date. Recently, we've been networking across schools to find other faculty and staff that have interests that align with the center. The core faculty that are affiliated with the center have produced papers and publications on forensic mental health education. Because we have that wonderful opportunity to explore best practices and what other programs across the country are doing, we find that a lot of programs are reaching out to us to find out how they can improve their own programs. We have rotations in forensics for psychiatry residents, and we do hope to continue to evaluate those programs and advance them as we grow as a center. Many of us in the core faculty and others provide didactics for a whole host of healthcare trainees on topics related to mental health and the law. We train social work students, nurse practitioner students, internal medicine, occupational medicine fellows, and others. In the spring of each year, there is a course called Psychiatry and the Law. And this is a course that is geared towards graduate level healthcare trainees and also law students. It provides the fundamentals of mental health law and practice, and it provides students an opportunity to do an individualized research project in forensic mental health or develop advocacy skills. We provide lectures to community partners, and some of us have provided lectures to the legal community. We have a growing forensic library, and then I'm happy to say we now have the annual Bruce Gage Endowed Lecture in Forensic Mental Health. So let's look now at the research and policy arm. This arm hopes to address complex problems at the interface of behavioral health and the law. We anticipate that it will be multidisciplinary and evidence-based. We aim to analyze and inform the community about various forms of legislation, laws, and practices that have psycholegal or forensic implications, really in effort to prepare the state to make data-driven decisions, customized to the needs, resources, and unique assets of our state's systems of care. Here are some recent activities by faculty and affiliate faculty with our center. We put forth an outreach survey, and this was one way for us as a center to introduce our goals and vision, but also to get some feedback from members of the community, those with lived experience or those who are working in forensic settings. I have identified the link here, and the link remains active. So if you have not yet completed the survey and you'd like to, the link is also identified in the resource section at the very end of my talk today. Those of us who are core faculty have already produced a number of publications on forensic mental health education, but others of us have also produced papers and talks on a whole host of issues related to behavioral health and the law. And in fact, trainees have been involved in this as well. In the past 4 to 5 years, I've had 1 law student, 3 forensic psychology fellows, and 7 general psychiatry residents publish with me on topics of behavioral health and the law in refereed journals. Some of us have served as expert matter consultants to reports that go to the legislature. Some of us have written portions or been declarants in amicus briefs for legal cases. Some of us have written op-eds on issues related to behavioral health and the law in an effort to reach a broader community audience. And I'm happy to say that so far our research has been a good balance of what I call nimble and dedicated. Because there are so many changes to the laws and regulations that affect mental health practice, it's nice to have some faculty with a strong foundation and knowledge base in forensic issues that can respond relatively quickly to the anticipated changes of any given law. At the same time, it's really nice to have some faculty who are working on longer-term solutions to major problems in our state, in the area of forensics in particular. Here are some of the topics of research and policy work that faculty and affiliate faculty have been working on. One of our core faculty has focused on enhancing access to evidence-based psychotherapies for psychosis in forensic settings. An affiliate faculty member has been working on the association between different types of criminal justice involvement and suicide attempts. Really important work looking at suicide attempts amongst recent arrestees. Some of us have looked at juvenile sentencing policies, restrictive housing or solitary confinement, and its psychological implications. We've written on the behavioral health implications of inmate release during this pandemic. And some of us have worked on educational modules to help those in the healthcare industry, physicians and scientists, translate their research in a way that policymakers or lawmakers can understand. And let's turn now to the service arm. There are 2 primary goals that we hope to work on with the service arm. One is we want to capitalize on the need for clinical consultation and provide some sort of more formalistic consultation service for psycholegal issues. We're in the exploratory phase with that. We also hope to develop a forensic assessment clinic. And one of the primary goals here would be to provide a training clinic to expose a whole host of trainees to forensic cases and forensic issues. This clinic we aim to be really a specialized assessment for the courts and also the workplace, doing assessments like fitness for duty or violence risk assessments in employment settings, types of assessments that we don't commonly do with routine clinical practice. Either directly or indirectly, we also hope to influence the clinical care for justice-involved persons and implement and evaluate evidence-based practices in forensic settings. Now, it's really important that we understand that sometimes the legal world and the mental health world don't speak the same language. There are real skills that we as mental health professionals can learn and develop if we want to be most successful and helpful in advising the courts, the legal system, and policymakers. And so Judge Finkle is going to speak to us about that. I should add that Judge Finkle has been a real friend of our department. For the past couple of years, I have been running a mock testimony experience for senior psychiatry residents. And Judge Finkle has volunteered to be the presiding judge in that mock testimony. And he'll be doing that again for us this year. But this is what he says about this interaction between mental health and the law and how we as mental health professionals might be more effective.
Hello, I'm Judge Michael Finkle with the King County District Court. I'd like to talk about 3 points in the brief time that I have. My views are my own. They do not express the views of any other judges. First, remember that judges and mental health professionals do not speak the same language. If your report is directed to the court, the judge might find it helpful to read plain English descriptions of behaviors and diagnoses in addition to the jargon that is very specific to your profession. It is a great opportunity to educate the judge so he or she can utilize the report as the important asset that it is. Here are 2 examples. When you write borderline personality disorder in a report, you and your colleagues know that you're talking about a series of dysfunctional and potentially harmful behaviors, and you're putting a name to it. But the judge might never have heard the phrase, or might think that it's not a very serious issue just based on the particular name. You know the nuanced differences between a thought disorder, such as schizophrenia, and a combined mood and thought disorder, such as schizoaffective disorder. A judge reading one of those phrases in a report might nod in agreement outwardly, but internally will have no idea how to assess your report. Second, generally speaking, most judges don't understand psychiatric treatment. All the person has to do is take a pill or get a shot. Why don't they want to do it? Why isn't it working? That's something that a judge might think. All of us in this virtual room know that there are side effects to deal with. Not all antipsychotic medications work exactly the same or have the exact same side effects. And a person might need talk therapy in addition to the pharmacological treatment. Homelessness might be a factor. Poor nutrition might be a factor. Previous trauma might be a factor. And in terms of timing, the statutory treatment periods were written with budgets in mind by legislators, not with medical issues and medical treatment in mind. Anything you can add by way of explaining why treatment will take more time or less time, or why you can't predict the time, can help the judge make a better decision. Third is my soapbox. Anything you can do to humanize the person in the report might remind the judge that he or she is dealing with a real person who has real feelings, is in real emotional pain. Court dockets are very crowded, and someone with a mental illness who's symptomatic can disrupt the running of that calendar. It's easier to show kindness and patience towards a person rather than towards a number on a court docket. Sometimes all it takes is a general reminder to the judge that this is a person they're dealing with. And my timer is giving me a general reminder that my time is up. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.
All right, so Judge Finkle's perspectives are really instructive, and they highlight the ways in which mental health clinicians can learn to be most effective when working within the legal system and other systems of care. Let's talk a little bit about how the center plans to move forward. I've mentioned that our center currently is really in its infancy, but we hope and plan to grow the center over time. We want to provide an academic approach to the complex issues and really complement existing state and community resources. We anticipate that we will be a leader in forensic mental health, not only locally, but nationally. Here are some ways you can get involved if you'd like. On December 11th, we'll be having a mock testimony exercise for senior psychiatry residents who are working with me. They will essentially be on the hot seat as expert witnesses with a local judge providing the cross-examination, a local attorney providing the cross-examination, and Judge Finkle will preside. This is really an exercise geared for trainees. So if you are a trainee and you're interested in being a mock juror and providing feedback to the experts, let me know and we can get you connected to this. The next administration of the law and the psychiatry and law course will be this spring. Again, this is a class geared towards graduate level healthcare professional students and also law students. So please contact me if you have questions about that. Also this spring, core faculty affiliated with the center will be conducting a 3-part webinar on topics related to forensic mental health. We are still in the phase of selecting the exact dates for those talks, but we will make sure that information gets out to you. And I'm happy to say that in April, we'll be hosting another forensic lecture through this Grand Round series that will be put on by Dr. Deborah Pinels. She's a forensic psychiatrist currently in Michigan, and she has a real interest in community forensic mental health. She also has a unique tie to our state because she has been a monitor in those true blood cases related to competency to stand trial, wait times, and programming. Here are some other ways you can get involved. You can let us know who you are. If we don't yet know about you, please reach out if you have an interest in this area, or if you're providing expert work but don't have formal forensic training, let us know who you are. We are interested in learning about more programs and resources that align with our center's goals. Let us know if you are familiar with any of those. We're always on the lookout for strong sites for training. So if you know of clinical sites for general psychiatry training or potential fellowship training, please let us know. You can complete that outreach survey and then help us spread the word. It's a new center and we want to get our name out there. Now, I started this talk by recognizing Dr. Bruce Gage, and I'm going to conclude in the same way. Dr. Gage is aware that I'm giving this talk today, but he does not actually know the real contents of my talk. He happened to give me some remarks, his personal remarks, however, and I think they perfectly summarize my intended comments for this talk. So I'm going to read to you his prepared remarks. The founding of this annual Grand Rounds lecture on forensics is an important milestone in the development of the department's pursuit of excellence in forensic psychiatry. Though many have paved the way for this step, the leadership, understanding, and enthusiasm of Drs. Unitzer, Cowley, and Piel have been critical to the steady advance of forensics within the department. Forensics is often misunderstood, and its value to clinicians and administrators is sometimes not recognized. Partly, this has to do with the misconception that forensics is limited to evaluation of individuals involved in judicial proceedings, whether criminal or civil. In actuality, forensics is an incredibly broad field. There's also a long-standing view among many that forensic practitioners are simply hired guns. In fact, it is owing to the participation of academic medical centers in forensic training and development of forensics as a subspecialty, combined with the assiduous work by the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law, that has brought standards of practice and robust ethical guidelines to the field. Ethics is arguably now the cornerstone of forensic psychiatry. In this modern age, the law is deeply embedded in medicine and especially in mental health. Clinicians are too often unaware of the statutes, administrative codes, and case law that impact standards of care, documentation, and clinical decision-making. Forensic training was essential to my administrative work at both Western State Hospital and the Department of Corrections, not only because of the raw legal understanding it provided, but also the view of systems afforded by forensic work. Hopefully, these brief musings offer some insight into the value of the field of forensic psychiatry and what it has for all of us. I wish to say how deeply honored and humbled I am by having this series inaugurated in my name. Besides Dr. Gage, I want to also thank the department for its support in creating the center, the core and affiliate faculty, in particular Sarah Kopelovich, Kate Michelson, and Susan Rentals, and the many consultants we've had in getting us to this point, as well as Mr. Stuller, Dr. Resnick, and Judge Finkle for your helpful comments in this preparation for this talk. Thanks. If you have any questions for me or want to reach out to the center, here is my emails and that of the center, and we welcome comments and feedback. We'd like to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Piel. And Thank you for quoting Dr. Gage and for mentioning this as the Bruce Gage Endowed Lecture. I want to apologize for not advertising the lecture as such. I take responsibility for that, and I'm sorry. But thank you for mentioning it and for having the quote at the end. Particularly about ethics being the cornerstone of forensic psychiatry, which was interesting to me. A couple of comments and questions came in, Dr. Piel. Maybe the easy one first. Is the Stuller video available online to share with teams?
I understand that he is going to be putting it on YouTube if he hasn't already. And I understand that this lecture will also be available from a YouTube source or our department site. So it should be available for people to view again.
Okay. So another question came in about what is the relationship between the Institute and the Behavioral Health Institute at UW? Excuse me, between the center and the Behavioral Health Institute.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
This question is about trying to describe a relationship between this new center and the Behavioral Health Institute at UW. I'm not sure what that, without clarification, I'm not sure what that means. It might be related to clinical care delivered within the Behavioral Health Institute, but I'm not sure. There may not be much to comment on.
I'm going to speak to that. These are both pretty much brand new entities in the department. The Behavioral Health Institute, based at Harborview Medical Center, and this new center, which is really a department-wide center. There will be overlap. There will be people who work in both entities. And I think the missions are pretty nicely complementary, but I don't have anything more specific to say about that.
Another question came in about training. This must be related to workforce training that's delivered by the center. Is there an EDI component in the training? The comment that current training programs rarely cover historical racial trauma and how to address this in mental health practice. EDI, I assume standing for equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Well, absolutely. So, this center is in its infancy. We have some faculty that are working on training programs for general psychiatry residents. But over time, we hope to develop more and more programs, right? In particular, the fellowship for forensic psychology trainees. And the ACDME has a whole host of requirements, including diversity requirements for training at that level. And of course, we would plan to implement those. And as our understanding of those issues develop, we want to be providing best practices and education in that area. So that would be certainly an aim of ours.
And Dr. Piel, a question from a current psychiatry resident. Is there a sense of the timeline of the forensic psychiatry fellowship? You may have an applicant.
That person should definitely reach out to me. I'm happy to give them what I know so far. It can't come soon enough for me, but it will take some time to develop.
Okay, so I think on this note, we should wrap up. I want to say a couple of things. Thank you to Jennifer for giving a really outstanding first Bruce Gage lecture. You set a very high bar. I didn't mention at the beginning of this, I said a bunch of nice things about you. I didn't say that you're one of the most effective teachers we have in the department. And I think the people who listen to this lecture probably know what I'm talking about. The second thing I want to say is a huge thanks to Dr. Bruce Gage for his many years of mentorship and many other contributions to the department, to mental health, and to our state. I just want to add to your thanks. Thank you very much to all of you, and thanks for a great presentation today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.